Hi guys, I'm on the camera. The thunderstorms have meant there's nobody doing any work next door, so I can get on the camera. So, I thought while I could get on the camera and my hair doesn't look like a frizz bomb because it has entered the frizz bomb world of loving itself in the frizz bombness. Lately, with the weather, we've got some thunderstorms as well, which is great. It's just eased off a little bit now. The sun's come through a bit, and hopefully we're going to get some more later. So I'm going to use this time and this energy to get out this video that I keep mulling around in my head. And it's basically a Morrigan video, as well as discussions of the themes of sexuality and power. And female power, generally speaking, with it being the goddess Morrigan. But I think sexuality is a good one. And power sort of goes into this because of the whole guilt trip that ends up being around spirituality, sexuality, and religion. In most religions, it's negative. Sexuality is a bad thing. It should be suppressed. All this, that, and the other. Now, when I was growing up, this was something I never, ever could accept. And I was quite moral about my sexuality. So, you know, when I'm with a partner, it's because I love them. And that is sometimes looked at in modern terms. It's a weird double standard. There has been quite old-fashioned, and I would never change that for the world. It has to mean something, first and foremost. Let's put that there, you know. It has to be a connection of heart, mind, and body, because otherwise you're just selling yourself short as far as I'm concerned. All or nothing. All or nothing. I'm not demanding in the slightest. Right, so when I was growing up, there was a lot of that in the spiritual stuff that we were taught, you know, how it was bad, how it was negative, and how it should be somehow suppressed. And it went against everything that I innately felt about it. There was a disregard for feminine power, and even throughout my history studies, you know, it's really quite scary when you go over the history stuff and you see the suppression of female sexuality, and we're not even close to being as liberated as some of the ancient societies were about female sexuality. It was just more accepted in some places, and it just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse with possibly with the onset of Christianity. It's a whole argument into itself. It's so warm. How is it this warm? Talking about the love. I'm going to amuse myself all the way through this. I'm in a right naughty mood today. So, in modern terms, pagans and the embracing of paganism is often female dominated. Not completely, obviously, but it is often very female dominated as women go looking for their own sense of self-confidence, their own self-worth, and they want to own their power. And sex and power have become such dirty words. They have such negative connotations. You say either word and it's instantaneously a bad thing. And that's some of the problem. And then we have sexuality being cheapened in society. You know, it's become so cheap in society. I could rant, and I shan't, with, you know, selling sexuality to people who are far too young, and all the rest of it. But within the path of the Morrigan is quite a sexual goddess, to the point where some of the books about her actually list her as the goddess of battle and sex. I think the Guises of the Morrigan, the Irish goddess of sex and battle. It's one aspect of her very I don't want to say multi-purpose. She's a very complicated goddess. She's very complex. She has many roles. She draws strengths from many different areas. And it's interesting that when sexuality is in the title, it's alongside the death aspect. Human beings have a really weird way of connecting sexuality and death. It is odd. You know, the whole vampire thing. Vampires, you know, it's all to do with sex and death. True Blood, in a word. And in a TV program. And even like the French word for orgasm, which is le petit mort, is the little death. It's the intricacies, the tying together of life and death. Obviously, sexuality leads to children, which is often disassociated from it, but it's one and the same. And the process of creation is tied in there. And it's not always in modern society about the creation of a child, although that is a possibility. It's also the creation of energies between the people. You know, whether we admit it or not, there is something that takes place during this very intimate time. There is an energy shared, there is an experience shared, there is a hormonal release, there is a physical release. And how can I best, I don't know, it sort of connects people. And especially if you're like me and you only get involved with people with whom you have an emotional investment, it's just my way of being, and to each their own, obviously. But of course you're going to have an emotional strengthening of the bond, and the lack of that between two people would be the weakening of a bond in a relationship. I think that's true. Excuse me while I drink water. The temperature in here is ridiculous. So the goddess Morrigan is often portrayed as a sexual goddess, and there are, you know, many of her myths. She mates with Dagda at Samhain on a river, and there's the thing about the land being that. I've got a whole list, right? There's when she's Mecha, she mates with a human male whose name I cannot pronounce. Where is it? Where is your name? It's not him. He's the one she they're all crew. It's really the one she successfully mates with and lives with is spelt Crunchy Chew. That's not how it's said. Crunchu? Not sure. There's not a phonetic spelling on that page, which is a little bit difficult. Anyway, he's the guy that she had, a mortal man whom she, as in her guise as Maka, set up home with this guy and got pregnant by this guy. And she sort of just turned up one day. I love this. And just sort of moves in. Just takes over, just warms his bed and takes over all the wifely duties and things. It doesn't end up very well for him when he boasts about her when he's not supposed to, but she's quite often seductive rather than being seduced. And I just take this as being her power. You know, she is sexually confident, sexually beautiful. She's a goddess. She's not messing about. She knows what she wants. And she's not very best pleased when another guy, I've got his name written down phonetically. I found a really nice picture. It's the hero, Chuchalan. Right, come on, where's the phonetic spelling? I know you're in here. Anyway, she tries to seduce him and he is having nothing to do with it. He gets into a lot of trouble for having nothing to do with it and not realising Chuchalan? Kukulan? Is it Kukul? Kuluan. Kulanuan. It might be that. I've got that in my head from somewhere. He doesn't become her lover and is sort of punished for it. He ends up dying and it's believed to be sort of a rejection of her advances led to his death. Now, some people think this makes her sort of spiteful, like, you didn't give me what I wanted, bye-bye. But I wonder if it's more to do with the cycles of life and death and the connections of sexuality to death that I mentioned earlier. And is it not possible that his rejection of her gift of energy life or life and creation meant that he was then without that energy force and died in battle? It's certainly true that the Morrigan's powers, the Morrigan's passions, the Morrigan's ecstasies change out battle outcomes. Trying to. I don't think I have an example. There is, of course. Okay, the sexual union between Morrigan and Dagda ensured the victory of the Tuatha De Danann to overthrow the Fomorians. And Dagda is the father god, which is actually tied up, is particularly in my path, with the father aspect of the Morrigan male counterparts, consorts. And it makes a lot of sense that he's father. He's also quite a boisterous god, if I remember. You know, he was quite boisterous and alive and joyful and into pleasures. So take that as you will. And some people sort of think of that as being a weird thing. Like, how is the goddess of death so sexual? And why would she mate with life? And it's only when you sort of go beyond and think about it, like the cycles of life and death, the cycles of creationism within sexuality, and that you start to think, well, it's the coming together of the two. I guess this is going to do more work, even though it's been thundering. I'll try and get this finished. It's the coming together of the two cycles of life and death at Samhain, which is the new year, when one year ends and another year begins. So it's all about life and death cycles within that sexual act. The final thing that's worth talking about, and is very, very relevant, I think, even in today's society and for all time, is the demonization of a female goddess because of her sexuality, and therefore the demonization of female sexual power. This is something which is very much in the forefront of my mind right now. We've had nonsense going on in the news again about the government's right to control pornography, and their right to tell you, and you have to go tell them what you're watching. They have justifications for it, but it's basically them controlling sexuality, and rather than allowing parents to govern what their children may or may not have access to, and all this other stuff. And it's weird, and it's scary, and it's the suppression of sexuality again. And we have this really weirdness, double standard. My friend was talking about this the other day, and I completely agree with her, where we have that being controlled, and then some of the music videos that you see is literally bordering on it. And it's because they make money off it, basically. Big bucks in making women look belittled in sexual manners, making them look like a sexual object and nothing else, rather than it being more about the ability of women's rights to choose and the sexual freedoms and this, that and the other. And it does feel like we got to a certain point and then got crushed in terms of female liberation and sexual freedoms. The Morrigan is often demonized in mythology, and Morgan Le Fay is a good example. The Morgan Le Fay is often connected with the Morrigan, considered to be an aspect of the Morrigan, and her Christianized myth makes her out to be quite demonized, negative, power-hungry, mad. And in the other, there are two versions, and in the other version, this isn't the case. She's a healer. If you've ever watched Mists of Avalon, that always resonated with me a lot more, or read Mists of Avalon, excuse me, that always resonated with me a lot more than, say, the stereotypical version. And it's all tied up with the Morrigans, as I have said in previous videos, right to get rid of kings who were no longer serving the best interests of their people and their land, which were one connected to each other within Celtic mythos. That right is then challenged, belittled and demonized within characters from Morgan Le Fay, who, when she's trying to replace a negative or an unfit king in her mind with a more powerful, strong, young one, that's then demonized as being a negative action rather than the sovereign right of the goddess Morrigan. Talked about that in some length with myths and things mentioned in one of the rune videos, so I won't go over it again in too much detail. So, just some food for thought, really, and just I thought I would put this video out there and just have a little bit of food for thought. I am going to have to cut it short because I can hear them making a load of noise already, and I'm not going to go into as much detail as I would have liked, but otherwise I'm just going to get completely distracted by the noise. So that will have to be it for this video. I'm alive, I'm still here, I still have my head, it's all, attached. Many blessings.